just a thought about funding on this too. I'm hearing a lot of talk about grants and needing to get these funds over to the local units of government. Throughout the process, there was a real concern that if the amendment passed, and now that it's passed, that this money is going to be used to supplement existing budgets. So there was language in the legislation that would discourage that from happening. I think you also want to take a look at local units of government and not create a system where this is just let them give them the money directly, but that they maintain their current levels of funding as well. Otherwise, this money is not going to go very far. So there should be some sort of cost match, and I think local government needs to be comfortable not reducing their budgets on the natural resources protection either.
I think this is just going to be a step back to the more of the question phase of this session today. Is a question that I'd like to get answered is, after 25 years, what is everybody's picture of what success is going to be like? What are we going to try to accomplish? And what would be a good level to say we've reached success? I think that should be answered before we can really, truly decide what we're trying to mechanisms we're trying to accomplish.
Well, that's a good point. That's actually, that's kind of the hint that we gave you in that first response that you'd like to provide us on that green sheet. That'd be helpful to have your definition of that, because it is going to be different from one part of the state to another. I mean, and it may involve landscapes, it may involve social things, it may involve a lot of things, but I think that is important. It'll help shape the vision that the councils will use to do their decision making. And so I think, whether we have a use of an existing state conservation plan, or whether we use an amalgamation of local plans, whether we create something that doesn't yet exist, that is important to guide all of that. So no one has that, and it all depends on your putting that together. That's the way I see it. If we have no longer any questions, that's okay. Oops, Randy gets to go. No more.
Two more, because Steve's running and I can go. One is, you talked a bit early on about concern for local staff capacity. I would also add that you should have a similar concern for staff capacity at the state level, particularly on the state level side. A good example, for instance, is the Stormwater Steering Committee has worked very hard to generate a roadmap project for moving stormwater ahead at the state policy level. There is no staffing, or really minimal staff support for the steering committee's work. It may be appropriate to look at some staff support out of the constitutional amendment funding. The other comment is somewhat similar, which is there are measures, I call them the development of compliance tools, work that can and should be done at the state level to make the regulatory programs much more effective. Two examples that come to mind. I've been working on a proposal for something called minimal impact design standards to extend a quantitative design methodology to well beyond just stormwater ponds, to the much broader range of relatively new stormwater management techniques that we want to see applied, but we don't have worked into the regulatory program in a quantitative fashion that can either be picked up by design engineers or landscape architects or agencies that are doing review. Another example is that we badly need a relatively simple modeling system for dealing with compliance with TMDL waste load allocations and load allocations that can be picked up by local governmental units. Tools like that need to be developed at the state level. The locals don't have the resources. It's a very effective use of money. Good tools can be applied by everybody and yield tremendous results. And it's appropriate that the development of those tools be considered for funding under the amendment funding.
Yeah, and to add on to that, you talked about 2 compliance tools, which, are basically ways to, cost effectively put data in the hands of decision makers. We're also seeing a need for that in the habitat area too. We have these large scale, plans. We have a state, it's a duck plan or waterfowl plan, for example. But at some point, we've got to get it right down to the landscapes where these projects are going to be built on, and allowing some local decision makers to have enough data so they can pick the most optimal sites to pursue for, projects on the ground. And so we've also been working in that arena as well. Oh, there it's Paul.
Paul Nelson, Scott County. I have to remember what I'm doing now that Ed and I've been kind of working out the exchange rate here. But getting back to building on Paul's comment about permanent easements, there's a whole issue of maintenance after you do things that you need to consider as well. The argument could be that the locals shouldn't apply for something unless they have the ability to maintain it. Or should you consider in applications that they speak to maintenance or apply for some maintenance money to on-go things? Because even easements, I mean, there's different appropriate 5, 10-year, 15-year agreements or easements, all of that require some follow-up in terms of administration of those easements, monitoring, tracking, or taking care of the projects that are built as well. So you don't want to just create a system that builds a number of things and then just assumes that everything's going to be cool after the fact, too. So
Would you be okay, Paul, with if somebody said, we're going to build an alum treatment system here on this storm sewer, we want to capitalize an O&M fund? Would that be something you'd include in there?
I think we have to decide, or you may have to decide, this is a debate that's going on. I'm assuming there's a similar debate going on within the parks funding as to whether or not the money should be used for O&M or for new facilities, new parks, new capital improvements. And the outcome of that, I don't care so much right now, because the hat I'm wearing, I think locally, the entity that I work for, we can fund our O&M. But I would suggest either O&M becomes part of that, they submit an O&M plan with it, or they prove they have the ability, the commitment to do the O&M in order to get the funding.
That issue I know has already come up in some ways on the Outdoor Heritage Council too. When you're, acquiring or establishing habitat, you hope that you build it with a design that's going to sustain itself mostly on its own, but that we know isn't always the case, and the same is true of the water quality infrastructure. And so we've got some maintenance needs now with our existing infrastructure in both of those arenas, and we expect that, of course, as you build more of it, then there will be additional. And that's a very, very strong issue we need to make sure we pay attention to.
I have a comment online that I'd like to read from Yvette Christensen. She is asking, minimal post-monitoring funds are currently available to determine if the projects are working in improving waters. The new funds should also go towards post-monitoring efforts.
This isn't exactly a comment, but more kind of a follow-up question. It sounds like there's a lot of uncertainty in this whole program. How do we stay informed as we move forward? Can you guys put together a Clean Water Council page on the website that we can kind of keep looking at to get updates, or is there another mechanism where we can kind of stay informed, or are you going to continue having meetings like this? I'm just kind of wondering how we keep informed on changes and updates as this moves forward.
Well, I know that the Clean Water Council has a space on the PCA's webpage, and the LaSarthe Outdoor Heritage Council has their own web page now established. Derby, do you know that off the top of your head? I know it's LOHC something, but you probably don't know it either. But we'll get that to you as a follow-up, because we're gonna put this material together, and we will include in the summaries of this, a way for you all to access that. But